Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Torah studies. This week, Parshas Teruma. We learn about the building, the donations that was given to build the tabernacle, the holy temple in the desert. And the topic of discussion today, a tree of hope grows in the desert. When we are in the darkness, in the desert, we need some tangible promise of hope. And we're going to learn this beautiful lesson in this Torah portion from the Rashi, the way the Rebbe explains, that gives us hope. Sometimes, especially what we experience in the last year, more than a year, with the sufferings, with the horrific things that people go through, and you ask yourself, is there hope? Will there be peace? Will we go out of it? Will we have redemption? Will we have Mashiach? And yes, sometimes it's difficult to see it in the darkness, but we learn the message that Yaakov Avinu was giving us and teaching us, that something that applies today as well. And we were talking about in the beginning of the weekly portion, the portion of Teruma. Teruma means the giving or the donations. And the Torah talks about Hashem speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, saying, tell the Jewish people to provide all of the material that is necessary to build the temple, to build the tabernacle, a home for God. So let's see inside. So this is right in the beginning of the portion, the beginning of the weekly portion. The Torah says, God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. You shall take my offering. You will collect the following offering from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson wool, linen, and goat hair, and ram skins dyed red, tachash skins, and acacia wood. So those are the materials that was necessary to bring. And it goes on later what they do with each and every all of these different materials. Now, what is interesting, the last item is the acacia wood. That's what we're going to focus about today. So they needed to have a lot of beams, very big, strong beams, 48 long beams, and they needed to be 10 amot in length. An amot is about 1.5 feet, so about 15 feet long beams, and the width of it was 1.5 amma. So we're talking about close to 2 feet wide, very heavy beams. And the question is, now, the Jewish people, where are they? They are in the middle of the desert. They got out of Egypt, they came to the Mount Sinai, and they're right there in the middle of the desert. And the question is, where are they getting those giant woods? Where are they getting them? So the other things, you can see, the Jews, they came out of Egypt, they came out with all kinds of richness, gold, silver, everything. But where are they getting the woods to build a temple? So here Rashi tells us, where did the Jews find acacia wood in the desert? So Rashi says, acacia wood, where did they get these trees in the desert? Says Rashi, Rabbi Tanchuma explained that our father Jacob foresaw prophetically that the Jews would build a tabernacle in the desert. So he brought trees to Egypt and planted them, and he instructed his children to take them along when they would leave Egypt. Okay? So we're talking about hundreds of years earlier. Yaakov Avinu he took woods from Israel, brought them into Egypt as they came down to Egypt with his family, and he planted it in Egypt. And he told them, when you go out of Egypt, take those trees with you. All right? Now, as you remember, we mentioned about the way Rashi explains. The Rashi would always bring explanations that is very simple understanding. He's not about bringing all kinds of midrashic, homiletic interpretations or stories. So here we have a number of questions. Why would he pick such a bizarre story of where the Jews got the wood from? That Yaakov Avinu would bring, and he quotes a medrash. Okay, there's a lot of medrashes that talks about different things. Yeah, Rashi usually does not quote medrashes to bring us the stories. He only explains if something is not understood in the simple understanding of the verse. And here, if you're trying to explain the simple understanding of the verse, there's many different ways that you can explain where they had the wood. As we'll soon see, there is alternative explanations that are more rational, more logical, rather than telling us about the story that Yaakov brought from Israel, and he brought them into Egypt. For hundreds of years, they kept those woods to take it out. Another question is also, why does he quote the name of Rabbi Tanchuma? Again, this is another rule in Rashi. We explained that Rashi does not quote names from where the explanation is coming from, the source of his explanation. Rashi talks to the 5-year-old. He doesn't need any sources. He just tells him what it is. If he does bring the name, that means that the name adds to the explanation. So that's what we're going to be talking about soon. So those are the questions. Why did Rashi provide his source? Why does Rashi pretend this is a literal explanation using the words Rabbi Tanchuma explained, when it is a homily at best? Okay. And why does the literalist Rashi opt for such a complex explanation? Now, what other alternative explanations can you give to this question? Again, what is the question? The question is, where did the Jews have woods in the desert to build the Mishkan, the acacia wood? So there's other explanations. And those other explanations seem a little more realistic, more simple. So here's from the Ibn Ezra, for example. The Ibn Ezra says, some of our predecessors explained that our patriarch Yaakov planted them, and the Israelites brought them out of Egypt at Moses' instruction. So that's basically what Rashi says, right? Says the Even HaEzer as follows. It says, now, we don't know if this was transmitted to our predecessors by their ancestors. Again, we don't know if this was transmitted to our predecessors by the ancestors. We too should accept it. However, it is best to seek a different explanation if this was merely their theory. So he's saying if this was just a theory, we prefer to find a different explanation. And he says as follows, we suggest that there was an acacia grove near the Sinai desert where they arrived at Sinai.
Да, что? Хочешь
Moses
хлеб?
says Moses informed them that they would pause there for a long time. At that point, they cut down the trees to provide enough wood for everyone to build a hut and for the leaders to build large courtyards. Moses instructed them to build the tabernacle after Yom Kippur, which is several months after they built their huts. By then, they had plenty of available wood. Okay, so that's what the Even HaEzer says, that this is how he suggests where they had the wood from. He says, they had plenty of oases. There was some oases in the desert where they had trees, and they needed to cut down trees to build their huts, so they did it, and they had the trees. So that explanation sounds a little more real and not as far-fetched as telling a story that they carried woods for hundreds of years, what Yaakov told them. There are other suggestions that say that there were also merchants. There were merchants. After all, the Jews traveled in the desert. They were not so far from civilization. They were not as far from civilization, and there was whenever they were very wealthy, the Jewish people, and there were merchants from the nearby communities and countries and cities that they would bring whatever they needed. So again, that would be a simpler explanation to the question of where they got the wood for the Mishkan. So they bought it from merchants. What's the big deal? So again, the question is, why? What causes Rashi to come up with this explanation, strange explanation, that Yaakov Avinu, where did they have the wood? Because they carried all the way hundreds of years before. They brought the woods from Israel. They planted it in Egypt, and they took it out from Egypt, and they took it with them. That is the question. Where does it take it from? And again, these are the verses that in the Torah we find that while in the desert, the Jewish people did come across oases with trees. And this is an example of it from Exodus 15:27. It says, and they arrived in Elim, and there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. So if there were date palms in one place, could be other trees in other place, acacia trees. Or it could be that they bought from the merchants, from the nations. There were items, this is a Talmud that tells us, and that there were items that merchants from the community of nations would sell to them. So the Rebbe explains what compels Rashi. What compels Rashi to say that they actually, that explanation that Yaakov Avinu told them to plant the woods. So he says the question that compels Rashi to do this is because the way the Torah tells us, instructs us, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the Jewish people, and they shall take a donation. Ve'ikhu li Teruma. They should take from me an offering. Now, what does it mean, take? Okay, that's the very first verse. Speak to the children of Israel to take for me an offering. Do you take an offering, or you should say they should give me an offering? That they should give an offering. So Rashi says the Rebbe, that this word, take, that compels the whole narrative of the story. Why? When you're saying take, that Hashem says to Moshe they should take a donation, an offering, that means that the donation is there. They have everything ready. The word teruma means the giving, and also means separating from what they have already. So in other words, what the Torah is telling here, Hashem says to Moshe, they have everything with them. The gold, the silver, the copper, the wool, the things, including the trees. Including the trees that is needed to build the Mishkan. If that is the case, the 5-year-old learns this verse and says, Hashem says to Moshe, take from them, that means that they have everything. Here comes the question. Where would they have the trees? Where are the trees coming from? And you cannot give the answer that we just said before, that they had the oasis, they had the trees in the desert, because then it doesn't mean that they have it. It's not in their possession. They have to go, they have to cut it, they have to bring it, they have to buy it from the merchants, they have to bring it, so that means it's not in their possession. But from the words that God says to Moses, take from me an offering, that means that it's in their possession already. And this is why Rashi is compelled to use the explanation that comes from the Medrash, that the trees were given from Yaakov, brought it into Egypt, and he planted it, and they took it out from Egypt with them. Okay. So this is the Teruma, Afrasha, an offering, a separation. They will set it apart from their property as an offering from me. Now the question then is, though, why then does Rashi, why does he have to tell us that he brought it from Israel? That he brought the trees from Israel and he planted them in Egypt. And for that, Rashi explains. The other commentators that explain why. Number one, because in Egypt there was no, those acacia trees did not grow in Egypt. It was not the place. That's why Yaakov had to bring it from Israel and plant it in Egypt. Another explanation is because Yaakov insisted, Yaakov knew that one day God is going to command them to build a temple. Yaakov wanted that this temple should not be made out of regular wood. He wanted the wood that comes from the Holy Land. He wanted the wood that comes from the place, the holy place, That's why he planted them. He took them from Israel, the trees that grew in Israel, and he brought them in Egypt, and he replanted them in Egypt, so they have it. The trees that comes from the holy place. That's what the Be'er Mayim Chaim says. Yaakov wanted the acacia trees to come from the Holy Land. He replanted them in Egypt because the trees Yaakov brought would not have lasted all these years in Egypt had he not planted them. If he would just bring the woods and leave the beams over there, they would rot, they would decay. So that's why he took them and he planted them to make sure that everything is there, ready for them to go out to have these woods. But that doesn't answer completely the question. Why would Yaakov bring the woods from Israel, planted there? Okay, because he wanted the place should be holy from the Holy Land. What about the rest of the material? I mean, the gold, the silver, the copper, that was okay to bring from Egypt. So why is it that the woods had to come from Israel? So here comes the Rebbe, and it gives us a whole different understanding. And he says that Rashi really indicates this by mentioning the name, the source where this teaching comes from. The source is from Rabbi Tanchuma. Rabbi Tanchuma. Tanchuma comes from the word nechama, which means comforting. And this is, says the Rebbe, the purpose of Yaakov doing what he did was in order to bring comfort for the Jewish people all these years that they were in the dark galus, in the dark exile in Egypt. You see, when Yaakov Avinu went down to Egypt, the Torah tells us he stopped by Be'er Sheva. He stopped by Be'er Sheva. He came from his place, from Hebron, was it? Or Shechem. He went down and he stopped by Be'er Sheva, and then he went down to Egypt. What did he do in Be'er Sheva? The Medrash tells us that this is where he got the trees. Who planted those trees? Avraham Avinu planted those trees. So Avraham Avinu planted those trees in the Holy Land in Israel. Yaakov, before he comes down to Egypt, going down to the exile, and he knew that the Jews would go through a very, very difficult time in Egypt. He takes those trees on the wagons that Joseph sent for him, and he goes and he plants them. And he tells his children, those are the trees that were planted and grew in the Holy Land, in the land of the free, in the land of holiness, the land of redemption. And these trees we planted right here, and when you go out of Egypt, you are going to take out those trees. Says the Rebbe that this was in order that during the difficult times, the horrible times that what they went through in Egypt, the children were murdered, slaughtered. Pharaoh was bathing in the blood of the children. Babies thrown into the river. All of these difficulties. Yaakov Avinu wanted his children to have something tangible to hold on to. When they see those trees, when they see the trees that grew in the Holy Land, and they see and they say, we are here, but we are going out. We are going to take those trees with us. We're going to build a temple. This is the reason why Yaakov insisted to take the trees from the Holy Land, plant them in Egypt, and give them the ability of hope, and that they will go out from Egypt. Says the Rebbe, when the children of Israel were in exile in Egypt, in a state of such terrific distress that the Egyptians cast every newborn son into the river, they drew comfort and consolation from seeing the acacia trees Yaakov brought and planted in Egypt. This was even more comforting than God's promise. I will bring you up to Israel. I will also bring you up. It was especially comforting to know that Yaakov made this incredible effort because he prophesied that his children would build a tabernacle in the desert. He instructed his children, who instructed the following generations, to take them along when they left Egypt. So this was the purpose. This was the purpose when you see the children, the sufferings, and you have some hope, something to hold on to. As the Rebbe says, Jews would behold their physical eyes. They would behold with their physical eyes the trees that were transported from beyond Egypt, from Israel, which signifies redemption. This underscores for them that even during the time of bondage, they were not fully under the Egyptian thumb. They were under God's authority, who promised, I will bring you up to Israel, and I will bring you up. I will bring you up. They would be liberated from Egypt, ascend to Israel, and bring these trees with them. This is one of the things that throughout the exile, we go through difficult times. And we have these flashes, the hope, things that we can hold on to. Whether it was in the Friedrich Rebbe when he was in communist Russia, persecuted. Famous story, he was standing by the train station and he said to the people around him, he said, we should know the only thing that can go to exile is our bodies. Our soul is never exiled. Nobody can exile our soul. And this is what gives us the hope. This is what gives us the strength to overcome these difficulties. And the same thing happens today. When we live in a time of difficulties, we have this beacons of light in the time of the exile that serve like the trees that Yaakov Avinu planted, something tangible. Our sages tell us that in every generation, God planted spiritual trees, the tzaddikim, the righteous people, who, for them, they live, yes, in a physical world, and they look physical like everybody else, but yet they live in a way that they see the world as a redeemed world. Meaning, for them, they see redemption, they see godliness in everything. The Rebbe teaches us that this is the way a Jew lives his life. when we live our life, when we say to ourselves that all of the challenges that we have cannot stop us from doing what we need to do, no matter what, we are above it. We are above it. We are stronger than that. So we have those beacons of light that Hashem gives us. So in Egypt, it was the trees. In Egypt was also the fact that Yosef Atzadik was there with them. That's why Yosef was not taken out of Egypt until they came out of Egypt. As the Rebbe once explained why the previous Rebbe was not buried in the Holy Land in Israel, he was buried outside here with the Ohel, to be the beacon of light, to be what keeps us strong, what keeps us motivated, what keeps our faith. Hashem made sure that in Egypt, in the darkest of time, we have those trees to hold on to. We can touch them. We can feel them. And they give us the strength to overcome all difficulties. And these are the answers for the Rashi. What we asked before. That's why Rashi uses this example. Says the Rebbe, Jews are distraught over being in exile. Even if they enjoy material and spiritual prosperity, they still are distraught in exile. Because a Jew's genuine desire is to experience the divine presence. This desire is rooted in the core of our spiritual being. We are shaken to the core by the fact that the divine presence is not manifest today as it was when the temple stood in Jerusalem. Moreover, the following teachings from our sages disturbs us greatly. They taught that we must regard the fact that the temple was not rebuilt during our lifetime as if it was destroyed in our lifetime. So this is the real difficulties that we have. And for that, Hashem gave us the ability to stay strong in the time of galus, in the time of exile. And those are the tzaddikim that Hashem planted. As the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a righteous person does not pass away until a similarly righteous person is born. As the passage states, the sun rises, the sun sets. V'zorach hashemesh, vo hashemesh. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, before the sun set on Eli, the high priest, Samuel, Shmuel, the prophet from Ramah was born. So Hashem makes sure before one tzaddik goes, the other tzaddik is already here. Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, God saw that there would be few perfectly righteous people. So he planted them in each generation. As the passage states, for the pillars of the earth belong to God, and he set the world upon them. So Yaakov planted trees, and God plants righteous people as reminders of God's presence in the world and hope for the future. Rabbi Hillel Paracher said, the destruction of the temple did not cause the divine presence to be concealed from perfectly righteous Jews. He said, my teacher, Rabbi Isaac Epstein of Gomo, said in the name of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, that for the lofty souls, such as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the temple was not destroyed. Now this is true. This is true with the tzaddikim. It is also true. It is also true with every single Jew. One of the things what the Rebbe taught us is that it's not just that we live in a spiritual life because the tzaddikim can live in a spiritual life. But as one individual once came to the Rebbe and he asked him, what is the meaning of a Jew? And the Rebbe told him, he asked him, what is a Rebbe? What is a Jew? The Rebbe told him that every Jew is a candle. And the Rebbe gives light to the candles. So he then asked the Rebbe, did you light my candle? So the Rebbe told him, I gave you a match. Now you can light up your own candle. Now what does that mean? It is Yaakov Avinu that planted those trees. Why? Yaakov Avinu had a very special soul. His soul was like the soul of Adam, which was a general soul, a soul that included the neshamas, the souls of all the Jewish people. And the same thing is with the tzaddik. The tzaddik, the leaders of the generation, they also have special neshamas, the godly neshamas, souls that are general neshamas, that include all of the neshamas of the Yidden. Here says the Alter Rebbe, every soul in the world was included in the collective soul of Adam. In general, his soul was divisible into 613 elements, representing the 248 organs and the 365 sinews. More specifically, his soul was divisible into innumerable sparks. Now, Yaakov's spiritual beauty resembled Adam's spiritual beauty. That's from the Talmud. Yaakov resembled Adam. His beauty resembled Adam's beauty. What does that mean? This means, says the Alter Rebbe, that like Adam, Yaakov's soul also comprised all the Jewish souls. Thus, God's infinite light shines openly into the souls of all who follow Yaakov's example. Are upright of heart and engage in Torah study and mitzvahs observance. This divine radiance is stronger and most intense in the midst and hearts during prayer. So, this, says the Rebbe, it is everyone. We have that ability to connect to the part of neshama that is beyond the limitations of the galus. There's a story I heard from Rabbi Shapsai Slavatitsky, a shliach in Belgium. And he says there was this, it was a Jew, I think it was in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, that he came to synagogue. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he came to synagogue, and every time when they came in the prayer, during the holidays, there is the Birkat Kohanim, the blessings of the Kohens. So every time it came to Birkat Kohanim, that gentleman left the shul. And the rabbi was very uh, perplexed. He didn't understand, why does he always leave the shul? And one time he decided to invite him home to his holiday meal after the davening. So he figured he's going to wait and he's not going to leave by Birchas Kohanim. But sure enough, came Birchas Kohanim, the guy left the shul. So he waited till davening was over and he walks out, and sure enough, the guy waits outside for him to go to his house, and they walk together. And by the meal, the rabbi asked him, "Can I ask you a personal question?" He said, "Sure." He said, "Tell me, how come you leave every time by the Birkat Kohanim? What do you have against blessing of the Kohens?" So the guy became very serious and tells him, "I want to share with you what I went through in the concentration camp." He says he was there in the concentration camp. There was, I forgot which camp it was, but there was this rabbi in the camp that kept them, encouraged them. When it came a holiday, he would celebrate with them as much as they could. And then was one Pesach, one Passover. Before Pesach, he told them Pesach is coming. We're going to make a seder, we're going to have some matzah. Somehow they managed to get some matzah, and he gave each and every one crumb, and they were sitting on the floor, celebrating the seder. And then right there in the middle of them celebrating the seder, the door opens, and Yimach Shema Nazi stands there right in front of them. They all jump back into the whatever you could call beds. And the Nazi takes one Jew and he points a gun to his head and says, "Tell me, who arranged this?" And he said, "Me? I'm going to tell who arranged this. You rather shoot me than rather telling another Jew." So the Nazi took another Jew. And then the rabbi stands up. He opens his shirt and says, "I did it. You want, you can shoot me right here, right now." And he was about to shoot him, but then he tells him, "No, we're going to do it tomorrow. We're going to make a big spectacle in front of the whole camp. We're going to tell the crime that you did." And the next day, they gather the prisoners in the courtyard, and they say what happened last night. And with this whole game, what it did, the Nazi tells the Jew, "So what's your last wish? You like to eat something? You like to give something?" And he says, "I want to give a gift to my brothers, the Jews. I'm a Kohen, and I want to give them a Birkat Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohens." And he closed his eyes and he said the blessing, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, the whole the blessing of the Kohens. Everybody was crying. Says this Jew to the rabbi there, he says, "This blessing, I was standing there, and I heard this blessing of the Kohen that he gave me. I went then, I escaped, I survived the Holocaust, and I came to America. And I decided to drop everything. But then he said, I walked into a store to buy something, a non-kosher sandwich. I was about to take the non-kosher sandwich, and all of a sudden, what comes in front of my eyes? This blessing of the Kohen. Blessing of this rabbi that's given me the blessing." He said, "No, I can't do this." And I put the sandwich back, and he didn't even take the money back. There was other things, getting a job to work on Shabbat. And that blessing of the Kohen came back to him all the time, again and again. And he did let him. And he says, this blessing of the Kohen saved my life time and time again. And he says, I don't want to forget this blessing of the Kohen. If I am afraid if I hear any other blessing of a Kohen, I'm going to lose that special power, that this blessing of the Kohen in the camp in the Holocaust, that what this gave me. You see, this is the strength. This is the spiritual strength that we get. The acacia shittim, the acacia wood, the planted trees that Yaakov planted. So which in our lives we can have things that gives us strength to hold on to something. Look about the stories of the hostages that come out now from Gaza. Stories what they told in the dungeons, in the tunnels of the Hamas. They got their faith. Keith Siegel, who never said a blessing, never said Shema Israel, he came out and he told his children that he was there, it was there in the dungeons, in the darkness, that he stood up and he decided that he wants something, he wants some faith. When he asked him, what would you like for us to prepare you Friday night? What's your favorite thing? He says, please prepare for me a yarmulke and a cup of kiddush, a cup to make kiddush. I heard this from his daughter. She told us. And they couldn't believe it. So we see in the dungeons, we have the strength. We have the faith that keeps us. That faith that we hold on to allows us to overcome the most difficult times, that we're able to shine. It's interesting. It says, we read today in the parsha, we read about the menorah. The menorah was made of a kikar weight. It's a weight called a kikar of gold. And the kikar has a numerical value of 240. Kaf, resh. Kaf is 20, Kaf is 20, resh is 200, 240. The word ram, which means elevated, is also 240. The word mar, which means bitter, is also 240. Says the Frierdiker Rebbe, that a Jew must realize that no matter what the circumstances, whether it is ram, elevated, he must be like the golden menorah, shine. Even when it is mar, when it's bitter, he must realize that this is also something that was given to him so he can shine there. And holding on to these trees, Bezat Hashem, we're going to go out from Galus. We're going to go out, and it's coming soon. We see around the world what's happening. It is the sign, according to all signs, that Mashiach is coming. Just hold on a little bit longer, and everything we'll see how Hashem brings us. May Hashem help. We should see it very soon. Enough of this sufferings. We'll have only the good things. The coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu very soon. Amen. So thank you all for joining.
Oh, mine. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Talking to me?